A man sat in front of his personal computer, engrossed in a game. He mused to himself about a theory he had heard, dividing humanity into two distinct types, those who enjoy adult games and those who do not. With his glasses perched on his nose and headphones firmly in place, he identified himself as belonging to the latter category, someone who had no initial interest in such games. This indifference persisted until he encountered Last Arkansas. To him, this game, also known as Arcanum, transcended the realm of adult entertainment. On the internet, it was widely acknowledged that Last Ark was an RPG, with its non-erotic segments far surpassing the quality of many other games. The adult elements, to his mind, were mere bonuses. This man did not approach Last Ark as an adult game. He revered it as a divine RPG. Immersing himself fully, he had even class changed to an admirer, savoring every corner of the part as a gesture of respect. That he had turned this dedication into a hobby, meticulously collecting images of a heroine named Iris. There had been a time when he briefly considered skipping certain parts, but the thought felt sacrilegious. To skip, he reasoned, would disrespect the gods who created this masterpiece. Resolute, he committed to exploring every facet of the game as a token of his reverence. As he played, his face contorted with frustration, veins throbbing on his temple. He internally declared his disdain for the upcoming scene involving a character named Altos Randall, more commonly referred to as Scum Altos. This character, he thought, was a detestable mid-boss, a villain whose very appearance inspired maximum discomfort. In the game, Altos was infamous for boasting about his dubious status as the legitimate son of a duke's family. A cruel figure, Altos thrived on tormenting characters, often beating them and humiliating them as his sycophantic subordinates cheered him on. The protagonist of the game, a handsome and virtuous figure, often bore the brunt of Altos' malicious schemes. Altos was jealous of this character, carrying out all manner of atrocities to undermine him. Beyond this, Altos was also a source of trauma for many of the heroines, instilling such intense fear that some would shrink away at the mere sight of him, desperately pleading for him to stay away. Despite their terror, a few heroines mustered the courage to confront him, albeit shakily, with faint attempts at intimidation. Altos, unbothered, continued to wreak havoc on their lives. Among the heroines, Iris was a particular favorite of the man playing the game. She was clean, graceful, and cherished by players, which made Altos' treatment of her all the more enraging. The more the man thought about the harm Altos had inflicted on Iris, the angrier he became. His face grew redder, his veins throbbed harder, and his teeth ground together with barely contained fury that he wished fervently that he could somehow enter the game and exact justice on Altos himself, imagining ways to obliterate the scum's presence entirely. Eventually, his frustration overwhelmed him. Despite his commitment to respecting every part of the game, he decided that Altos would be the sole exception to his rule. Resolving to skip the next scene featuring this reviled character, he moved directly to the next segment. While progressing, he recalled that Altos' overwhelming unpopularity was a known fact, even among the production team. In an interview, one of the developers had expressed an inability to forgive Altos. Their hands clenched with visible anger. Within fan communities dedicated to Last Ark, it was a common trope for the protagonist to defeat Altos, thereby helping the heroines recover from their trauma. During a certain live broadcast of Last Ark, the moment Scum Altos appeared on screen, the chat section erupted with unfiltered comments. Viewers clamored for justice for Rilican, while others demanded that no one should refer to Altos as a noble, calling him names like pig, and expressing an overwhelming desire to see him suffer. Some suggested his right hand be broken, labeling him a vile character deserving of the worst. Amidst the chaos, the man in glasses watched intently as a skilled player from the gaming community defeated Altos by driving multiple swords through him. The sight of Altos bleeding profusely, clutching his belly, and screaming in despair before dying was strangely satisfying to this man. His face turned red with a triumphant smile as he watched, his gaming headset framing his head while he basked in the catharsis of this scene. He silently noted how fitting this end was for Altos, and how much satisfaction it brought him. Despite Altos being such a despicable character, the man reflected on how his fate remained the same across all game routes. Controlled by the mastermind, Altos ultimately met his end, buried in an unmarked grave with his name, Altos Randall, etched onto the gravestone. Continuing his musings, the man noted how other mid-boss characters often had opportunities for reconciliation events, or joined the protagonist in battle during alternate routes. Altos, however, had no such redemption. His unbearably annoying behavior ensured he remained irredeemable throughout the game. As the man adjusted his tie and removed his gaming headset, exhaustion was evident in his movements. Stripping off his clothes, he muttered inwardly about how he had just completed the 24th playthrough, or perhaps the 25th. The exact count seemed irrelevant to him now. Entering the shower, he scrubbed his head under the warm, steamy water, contemplating how he could spend his life playing Last Ark, yet his head throbbed faintly, the effects of sleep deprivation taking their toll. Emerging from the shower, he appeared utterly drained, muttering to himself about how the true ending of the game remained elusive. He had yet to complete the Scum Altos wrote, a step all players endured to advance further in the narrative. Changing into his nightwear, he admitted the conditions for unlocking the true ending were unforgiving, requiring the completion of all achievements. Standing before the bathroom mirror, he brushed his teeth while calculating that he had 2 hours before needing to leave for work, hoping to catch a bit of sleep. After finishing his nightly routine, he collapsed onto his bed, burying his face into the fluffy pillow that IS's tired eyelids. Marked by sleepless nights finally shut, his thoughts lingered on Alto's route. He convinced himself that he could not achieve full completion of the game without enduring that segment. Drifting into a deep slumber, he felt himself enveloped by darkness that IN his dreams. The heroines of Last Ark surrounded him, their tender care making him feel oddly comforted. Immersed in this dream, he considered the idea of dying happily in this state. If he truly had to die, he thought, reincarnation into the world of Last Ark as its protagonist would be the ideal outcome. Living joyously with the heroines while beating the living daylights out of Scum Altos became the centerpiece of his subconscious musings. The dream took a whimsical turn as he envisioned himself stomping on Altos with exaggerated flair, feeling a sense of amusement at the thought. Even in his dream, he laughed softly, appreciating how these fantasies fueled his determination before sleep. When morning came, he woke abruptly, sitting upright with a start. His first thought was whether he had overslept. The prospect of being late for work jarring him into full consciousness that he stood up, shock overwhelmed him, leaving him frozen and muttering internally as he surveyed his surroundings. The interior of the room struck a faintly familiar chord, triggering a cascade of memories. Recognition dawned as he realized the design mirrored a specific background from Last Arcanum that he racked his brain, trying to pinpoint the exact moment in the game this setting appeared. Then the thought hit him like lightning. He might have been reincarnated. The realization made his chest tighten as he questioned whether such an event could be real. Amid this revelation, a wave of panic overtook him as he recalled the contents of his personal computer from his previous life. The horrifying prospect of someone discovering his secrets gnawed at him. Secrets that clashed with his carefully curated image of being a man of culture. He tried to push the worry aside, convincing himself that this wasn't the time to dwell on such trivial matters. With a conscious effort, he told himself to calm down, to set panic aside for later. The priority now was understanding his current predicament. His thoughts raced, and nervous sweat trickled down his forehead. His damp hair clung to his skin as the weight of reincarnation settled heavily on his mind. The idea of being reincarnated into a game world struck him as troublesome. Yet, if this was indeed the world of Last Arcanum, he mused that the situation might not be so dire. His extensive knowledge of the game, accumulated through countless hours of play, would surely provide an advantage. Survival, he reasoned, shouldn't be too difficult with such a wealth of insight at his disposal. His internal monologue shifted to the pressing question of his new identity within the game world. Determined to find out, he scanned the room for a mirror, noticing one nearby, walking hesitantly toward it, that he stared at his reflection. What he saw made him freeze in disbelief. His face, his appearance, left him momentarily paralyzed. Then panic surged through him, and he screamed. The piercing sound reverberated through the castle, startling a young maid who dropped a ceramic plate. The loud crash of shattered pieces echoing in the hallway. Flustered, the maid scrambled to pick up the fragments, her hands trembling as she repeatedly mumbled apologies. An older maid approached, her calm demeanor in stark contrast. She bent down to help, addressing the younger maid, whose name was Rila, with a mix of reassurance and exasperation. The older maid explained that such outbursts were not uncommon for Ultisama, and admitted that even she had been startled by the sudden scream. Taking the broken plate from Rila's hands, she instructed the younger maid to check on the young master. Rila, still shaken, stammered her agreement and hurried off toward the source of the commotion. Inside the room, the reincarnated man, now occupying the body of Scum Altos, knelt on the floor, his hands gripping the ground in frustration. Waves of despair crashed over him as he muttered bitterly to himself that everything was over. He lamented his luck, bemoaning how he had managed to be reincarnated into Last Arcanum, only to end up as Scum Altos, of all characters. This was the character destined to be hated by everyone, mocked, and ultimately forced to meet a pitiful demise. Closing his eyes, he nervously wished that he could have been reincarnated as the protagonist, Sieg, instead. For a brief moment, he tried to convince himself that this might all be a mistake. Yet opening his eyes and staring once more at his reflection, he had no choice but to accept the grim truth. His expression sank as he acknowledged his reality. The sight of his youthful appearance in the mirror reminded him that Scum Altos was far younger at this point in the game's timeline than he had been in his previous life. Guessing his age, he concluded he must be around 10 years old. The weight of this knowledge pressed heavily on his shoulders, making his predicament feel all the more inescapable. Recalling the timeline of events, he realized this was around the period when Altos began developing a dangerously inflated ego, fueled by being hailed as a genius boy. The thought filled his head with the seeds of an idea, and his eyes widened with sudden clarity. His mouth opened in astonishment as the realization struck. There was still time that he could potentially avoid the disastrous, end-awaiting Scum Altos in the original story. Memories of the character's rise and fall flashed through his mind. Altos, blessed with incredible magic talent, had started growing arrogant around the age of 12. That the praise of being a prodigy led him to neglect both his magical studies and sword training. His once promising path deteriorated as he became infatuated with women, indulging in a life of excess. The unhealthy lifestyle, detailed in the official game lore, transformed him into the despicable Scum Altos. The image of the character licking his lips in a display of villainy surfaced in his mind, reinforcing the gravity of what lay ahead. Determined to alter this trajectory, he resolved to take the opposite approach. If Altos became a scumbag by following a path of arrogance and indulgence, perhaps avoiding those pitfalls could change his fate. That he considered his plan carefully, reasoning that he should steer clear of women, avoid selfishness, train moderately, and most importantly, stay away from the protagonist's party as much as possible. His hand rested thoughtfully on his chin as he mulled over this strategy, acknowledging that his tendency to mind his own business had been a strength even before reincarnation. Convincing himself of his ability to succeed, he reassured himself repeatedly that he could definitely manage this. With determination surging, he decided his goal was to become nothing more than a background character, blending into the scenery as the protagonist's party moved toward the game's climax. A wry smile crossed his face as he reflected on the irony. He had once played Last Arcanum to exhaustion, to the point of obsession. The sheer absurdity of someone gaming so intensely they overworked themselves to death was laughable. Yet now, having lived through it, he found it amusing that the same game had become the foundation of his new reality. Confident in his understanding of the system, events, and characters, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Looking back at his reflection, he addressed the Altos before him with resolve. He vowed to live seriously, declaring that he would not succumb to the same tragic end. His musings were abruptly interrupted by the creaking sound of the door opening. Turning his head, he heard a voice apologizing, and he wondered why someone would be saying sorry. As he fully turned, he was met with a sight that made him freeze. Before him stood a strikingly attractive girl, her presence momentarily overwhelming him. His subconscious cried out in surprise as he processed her appearance. The girl with a sad expression addressed Altosama directly, apologizing repeatedly. He stared at her in shock, utterly captivated by her beauty. Rayla, the young maid now standing before her master, asked nervously if she had done something wrong, her voice tinged with worry. She apologized again, insisting she had not meant to upset him. Snapping out of his stupor, he nervously asked who she was. But his mind kept circling back to one thought, how incredibly cute this girl was. Instinctively, he tried to adjust glasses he no longer wore, a habit from his previous life. This new body, however, lacked such accessories, a reminder that he was still adjusting to this reality. He wondered to himself if such a beauty had ever appeared in the original game. Rayla, her face pale with fear, explained timidly that she had heard Altasama's scream and thought it might be one of his infamous tantrums. She then cautiously asked if there was something troubling him, her worried tone betraying her hesitation. Altos, hearing the words of the maid, felt a pang of hurt as he realized what it meant. Throwing tantrums was such a daily and normalized part of Scum Alto's behavior that even the maid spoke about it without hesitation. This realization struck him deeply, placing him in an undeniably bad position. His train of thought was momentarily derailed as his gaze fell upon the maid's chest, which he stared at for so long that it became visibly awkward. The girl noticed her master's unwavering focus and flushed with embarrassment, hastily using her hands to cover herself. Still transfixed, Altos thought to himself how strangely familiar her chest looked. His memory then clicked, reminding him that this girl was Scum Alto's attendant maid. Meanwhile, the girl, fearing she had upset her master, quickly apologized again and again. Altos recognized her behavior and remembered her name, Rayla. He called out to her, addressing her directly, and asking why she kept apologizing. The girl, visibly trembling despite being taller than him, bowed her head low and went to her knees, sobbing as she clarified her name. Her voice cracked as she explained her name was not Rena, but Rayla. This was when Altos finally remembered her properly. Feeling awkward, he tried to calm her, telling her not to cry and to relax. However, Rayla, still overwhelmed, stammered out another apology, saying that she could be Rena if that was what her master wanted. Seeing her behave this way, Altos knew this was not a good sign for him. Panicking slightly, he tried to correct her, asking what she was even talking about, explaining that he had indeed called her Rayla, that he reassured her that he had no idea how she had misunderstood. Rayla, however, was still overcome with fear. She suddenly turned and began running away, apologizing yet again. Watching her shiver and retreat, Altos found himself wondering why she was so scared of him. The thought struck him like lightning. If this behavior continued, he would undoubtedly be confirmed as the villain in the story and meet the tragic end set for Scum Altos. Acting quickly, he stopped her from running and asked her to stop apologizing so much, insisting that her behavior only made him seem more like a villain. He expressed genuine worry, feeling that this situation was spiraling out of control. Rayla, stunned by her master's sudden display of remorse, froze in place. She was so shocked by his words that she could barely process them. Her disbelief was palpable, leaving her nearly speechless. She mumbled something about how she preferred using or the term she considered respectful for addressing her master. Altos, hearing her use or, was briefly shocked by the formality, which felt out of place in this context. Rayla quickly apologized again, explaining that she was not making sense and simply wanted to uphold the respect expected of her position. In that moment, Altos' memories pieced together more details from the game's official story that he recalled that Rayla, working for her family, was an unusually devoted maid to Scum Altos. Despite being loyal and hardworking, she had been manipulated by Scum Altos' selfishness, which ultimately led to her breaking her right hand. The memory of this event weighed heavily on him, as it encapsulated Scum Altos' indifference that I end the story. Scum Altos dismissed the crying Rayla without care, an action that cemented his disdain among the mansion staff and closed off any opportunities for personal growth. This narrative, posted later as a short story on the game's official website, caused an uproar among fans who demanded a scenario where mistreated maid could find happiness. Reflecting on this, the man now inhabiting Scum Altos' body came to a sobering realization. Rayla was not just a side character. She was a key figure in Scum Altos' story, someone pivotal to shaping his future. In his mind, Altos reflected that no reasonable master would unjustly fire or terrify an attendant maid, reminding himself that only villains behaved in such a manner. He questioned what he should do next, and decided his first priority would be to reassure her. Moving closer to Rayla, who was still crying on her knees, he addressed her gently, asking why she seemed so afraid. Rayla, through her tears, explained that it was because she had failed to perform the dialogue properly the previous day, mentioning how she believed she had troubled her young master with this mistake. Her response left Altos bewildered, especially at her mention of the term. He pondered what she could mean, as his understanding of awe from his past life was related to coaxing small children into taking food or medicine, something far removed from the behavior of a 10-year-old boy. The thought of Scum Altos, at his current age, being associated with this seemed strange. Altos considered the possibility that the Rayla referred to might be entirely different from the one he knew. Deciding to clarify, He asked Rayla what exactly she meant by awe. Her reaction was one of pure shock, her mouth agape as she struggled to comprehend why her young master would ask such a thing. She hesitated, her disbelief evident, before questioning aloud if the young master had come up with a new game. Overwhelmed, she began explaining in earnest, stating that according to her young master, there were 48 types of awe, listing those they had tried so far. Altos listened in growing horror, gradually realizing the gravity of what she was describing. This revelation struck him deeply, as he recognized that the awe she referred to was indeed something tied to Scum Alto's actions. Rayla noticed the terrifying expression on his face, and nervously asked if he still wanted her to continue explaining. By now, Alto's mind was reeling with confusion and shock. He momentarily lost his balance, almost falling to the ground, but Rayla quickly rushed to support him, asking with concern if he was all right. That he reassured her, claiming he was fine but feeling slightly dizzy, and insisted that no further explanation was necessary. Internally, he berated Scum Altos for putting such a beautiful girl through something so demeaning. As he stared at Rayla, he admitted to himself that she was truly a beauty. The thought crossed his mind that, with just a word, he could make her treat him the same way she had treated Scum Altos. However, he immediately discarded the idea, scolding himself for even considering such villainous behavior. He resolved that if he continued down the path of a villain, it would only lead to the bleak future he desperately wished to avoid. Firmly deciding against such actions, he vowed to make a change. Altos then asked Rayla if such an awe was a common practice in this world. Rayla replied thoughtfully, suggesting it might be common for a dog, perhaps. Her response made him realize how Scum Altos had demeaned himself to such a degree that even a loyal maid regarded him as little better than an animal. With newfound determination, Altos confidently told Rayla she would no longer need to perform awe. Her expression shifted to one of disbelief, as she stammered out that she had been told by him previously that she must do it. Her shock grew as she asked if this meant the young master intended to fire her. Hearing her assumption, Altos was taken aback. He asked why she would think he was firing her. His voice filled with frustration as he tried to make her understand. Rayla, trembling with fear, pressed her concerns, causing Altos to address her more directly. He pointed out her injured hand, questioning if that was not the reason she should stop such tasks. That he firmly stated that he would never force her to do awe or anything of the sort. Rayla, startled by his words, hesitated before asking how the young master had found out about her injured hand. Her question hung in the air, as Altos reflected again on how different he had to be from the Scum Altos who had previously inhabited this life. Altos responded to Rayla with a calm yet firm tone, stating that she was an important maid to him. He remarked that he could tell as much just by looking at her, though the truth was rooted in official information from the video game, a detail Rayla was completely unaware of. Her face revealed her shock and disbelief that her master had taken the time to notice her so deeply that Altos walked toward the door. He casually commented that her fear of being fired must have been the reason she had hidden her injured hand. He acknowledged that such behavior was understandable, considering the personality of Scum Altos. He mentioned that he would inform the head maid about her condition, instructing her to rest immediately. Turning back as he waved his hand, he told her to hurry up and recover quickly, emphasizing that she was his only maid, asking if she was aware of that fact. Rayla stood stunned, unable to believe her master had said words she thought she would never hear. As Altos exited the room, a sudden realization struck him. He had been speaking too casually, losing track of the formal boundaries he intended to maintain. That he acknowledged that he was responding more sensibly than Scum Altos ever had. But this thought unsettled him, as it suggested he might be veering too far from his intended role. Without hesitation, he turned back and ran toward Rayla, calling her name with urgency. Panting heavily from the short sprint, he bent forward, clutching his knees, and apologized profusely for having gotten her name wrong earlier. That he promised not to make such a mistake again, and admitted that trying to cover it up as if it had not happened was embarrassing. He also apologized for acting like a jerk. Rayla, moved by his sincerity, spoke with a gentle tone, reassuring him that no one could navigate life without making mistakes. She shared a personal story about breaking a treasured plate herself, reminding him that failure was a natural part of life. She encouraged him, saying that someone who could face their failures as Altos had done was truly admirable. Her kind words left Altos stunned and deeply relieved. With a warm smile, she assured him that everything was all right and confessed her unwavering belief in him. Her affirmation brought a wave of gratitude over Altos. He wiped stray tears from his eyes, thanking her sincerely for her kindness, that he asked her to continue relying on him in the future, smiling as he said it. Rayla, returning his smile, responded with a bright expression, agreeing wholeheartedly. She reaffirmed that Altos was her only master, that I end that moment. Altos silently reflected on how wonderful a character Rayla was, lamenting in his thoughts that she did not appear in the main story of the video game. As Altos walked down the castle hallway, he muttered to himself that it felt like he had overcome his first hurdle. However, he mused that it was difficult for someone like Scum Altos to transition into a mere mob character. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the headmaid, calling out to him and addressing him as young master. The sound snapped him out of his musings. As he turned to face her, Altos noted to himself that this woman must be the headmaid. The headmaid appeared utterly shocked, questioning how it was possible for the young master to be walking alone without holding a woman's hand. This comment made Altos wonder once more about the kind of person Scum Altos must have been to leave behind so many negative impressions and such deplorable behavior. 3 months later, Altos was frequently seen training. His once soft and unfit body now transformed into a lean and disciplined form. He had shed all the excess fat and relentlessly pushed himself into shape. On this day, he was counted performing his 100th push-up, a routine he diligently followed alongside daily runs. His training extended to magic, where he practiced body enhancement techniques, a fundamental skill in the world of Last Arcanium. Though considered basic, this technique proved remarkably efficient, allowing him to discover that its early applications significantly boosted his magical levels. In Last Arcanium, magical power was intrinsically tied to noble lineage, and Scum Altos, being from an esteemed family, possessed an absurdly high reserve of magical mana. This latent potential made it possible for him to elevate his magic to extraordinary levels. Reflecting on this, Altos found it wasteful that in the game's narrative, such immense power was used solely for malicious purposes. He set an hourglass and focused his training, enveloping his body in a magical aura for a predetermined duration, determined to maintain it until the sand ran out. The knock of the headmaid interrupted his focus as she entered the room, politely excusing herself. He turned to her and inquired about her purpose. The headmaid informed him that Rayla would be returning the next day. Hearing this, Alto's face lit up with unrestrained joy. His excitement spilled over as he eagerly asked if Rayla's hand had healed, expressing immense relief at the news. His genuine happiness caught the headmaid's attention, leaving her visibly surprised. Observing his reaction, the headmaid remarked that perhaps the rumors were not jokes after all. Confused, Altos questioned what she meant. The headmaid explained that Altos Sama had seemingly undergone a serious transformation, something she initially assumed to be a prank on the servants. Altos, feeling challenged, asked if she doubted him. The headmaid, with a smirk, responded that, given his prior behavior, skepticism was natural. Her words reminded him of Scum Alto's past transgressions, moments that now made him silently curse his former self. She mentioned that she would need to explain this apparent change to the other servants, and directly asked Altos what had brought about this transformation. Altos recognized that this was the question he had been avoiding. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, and he understood that he could not afford to give a vague answer. Fortunately, he had prepared for such inquiries and calmly delivered his response. Claiming he had awakened to the concept of noblesse oblige, the headmaid froze, shocked by his claim, and pressed him to explain if he understood the weight of what he had just declared. Altos, caught off guard by her reaction, confidently stated that noblesse oblige meant those with power and influence had a responsibility to use their position for the benefit of others, that he turned the question back on her, asking if this interpretation was incorrect. The headmaid stood silent, her stillness unnerving him, that he pleaded with her to stop being so quiet, confessing that her reaction was making him nervous. Eventually, the headmaid acknowledged that he was correct. She expressed her understanding and assured him that she would convey this sentiment to everyone. With a calm smile, Altos responded that he would rely on her to manage this task. As the headmaid turned to leave the room, she chuckled, commenting that the young master was precisely as she had expected him to be. Her laughter echoed faintly as she exited, leaving Altos alone in his room. Once she was gone, Altos silently celebrated in his mind, congratulating himself on how well his plan had worked. He noted that he had successfully deceived them, though he admitted to himself that his so-called noblesse oblige was not entirely genuine. He reflected on the true nature of his goal, which was less about embodying the noble ideal and more about mitigating the damage caused by scum altos, that he labeled his mission as scumless oblige, questioning whether even this lesser ambition could be considered noble in its own right. Altos awoke from his bed with a wide yawn, rising slowly before changing out of his nightwear into his training attire. As part of his usual morning routine, he began running, his steps rhythmic against the ground. While he ran, he reflected in his mind that it had been about a year since he was reincarnated into the world of Last Arkansas. The thought brought a sense of familiarity, as he admitted to himself that he had grown quite accustomed to life here. He decided to take a moment to sort things out in his mind, reminding himself that he now inhabited the body of Altos Randall, widely known as Scum Altos, a villainous character despised by players of the game, that as he pushed through his morning run, Altos silently recalled his previous hatred for Scum Altos when he was a player. Now, as he transitioned into push-ups, he noted with satisfaction how his initial count of 100 had increased to 150 through persistent training. Sometimes the lingering thought returned to him, questioning why, of all people, he had to be reincarnated as Scum Altos, that he wondered if Last Ark could have achieved its masterpiece status without such a despicable character. The idea struck him that light shines more brightly in the darkness, and where there is light, shadows are cast. This led him to muse that perhaps Scum Altos was not merely a shadowy villain, but in some way, the true main character in the backdrop of the story, that he entertained the notion of a beautiful boy overwhelmed by immense magical power, meeting a tragic end. It seemed poetic, yet in the actual game, Scum Altos' story had been nothing more than a series of atrocious deeds. Rising from his push-ups and shifting to sit-ups, Altos dismissed the idea that such a vile character could ever embody a shadowed protagonist. His deeds were simply too scummy. Having completed 150 sit-ups, Altos stood and walked toward the training grounds to practice his sword skills. As he walked, he reminded himself that he needed to sort out his situation, that he knew from the original game that Scum Altos met unpleasant ends in every possible route, from poisoning to stabbing and countless other gruesome deaths. Altos was acutely aware that if events continued to unfold as they had in the game, he too now, as Altos' reincarnation, would face a similarly horrible demise. This realization pushed him to work harder. Reaching the training area, he began swinging his sword repeatedly. His muscles ached with each swing, and his grip slipped at one point, sending the sword flying into the wall. Undeterred, he retrieved it and continued his practice that as he trained. He acknowledged in his mind that he was grateful for having joined the kendo club back in his previous life. Even though he had quit rather quickly, swinging his sword, he mused that he might have actually been quite good as he had dabbled in kendo. However, he admitted that a bamboo sword and a real sword were entirely different things, that he reflected that most of the swords in this world lacked curves, unlike the ones he had used in kendo, leaving him uncertain about how useful his club-level skills would prove. Altos decided that once he had built up his basic strength, he would need to properly learn the techniques of this world. By this point, he had completed 10,000 swings of his bamboo sword. His body was drenched in thick, dark sweat as exhaustion overtook him. He collapsed onto the ground, lying flat to catch his breath after the intense training session. Panting heavily, he let out a loud sigh and resolved to himself that even though he had been reincarnated into the world of his beloved Last Ark, he absolutely refused to meet an unpleasant end. Despite the challenges, he reassured himself that his extensive knowledge from thoroughly playing the original game gave him a significant edge. Altos silently resolved to use his knowledge cheat to achieve a peaceful life. Now he was in the room where he practiced magic that he activated body enhancement, feeling the mana begin to flow through him as his entire body was enveloped in a glowing aura. He focused, telling himself that his goal was to become strong, to be a mob character. In times of crisis, even being a mob was better than being powerless. He reminded himself that it was best to raise both his physical and magical levels, so he set the hourglass down and began to focus on maintaining his enhanced state. He knew that maintaining this enhanced state to its limit was crucial. Repeatedly practicing like this was the most efficient way to level up his magic, that I asked the hourglass turned upside down. He noted that the status screen was no longer visible, which was why he was using time as a benchmark. When he first started training his magic, he He could only manage 3 minutes before the magic leaked uncontrollably. He knew that as the duration increased, it was proof that his magic level was improving. But despite his progress, he understood how tough this training was. The difference between doing it in the game and real life was immense, particularly because of the magic leakage that came with body enhancement. As Altos continued, he enveloped himself in an aura so intense that it reached the roof of the room that he couldn't help but wonder if the sheer amount of mana pouring from his body, flooding the space like a wide beam of light, was dangerous. He was well aware that body enhancement leaked magic from the entire body, due to its nature. The overflowing magic was a direct indication of his strength, but it also meant that controlling the leakage was impossible. Why now? Altos noticed from the hourglass that 12 minutes had passed. He had tried to suppress the magic leakage, but doing so caused the body enhancement effect to wear off, showing just how difficult this process was. Altos' bloodline gave him an absurd amount of magic, and when he used body enhancement, that power overflowed uncontrollably that he realized that any opponent would immediately know how strong he was once he used body enhancement. No matter how much someone tried to hide their identity, someone from a good family like Altos would be exposed. As someone trying to avoid standing out, Altos knew he couldn't rely on body enhancement, except for leveling up, that he saw it as a waste of his reincarnation into last arc if he couldn't use body enhancement for more than practice. He wanted to experience what it was like to be overpowering with body enhancement, since it was every player's dream to at least try it once. 18 minutes passed, and Altos noticed the hourglass had marked a new record for him, that he smiled to himself at the achievement, but before he could fully absorb the moment, a voice suddenly called out beside him. It cheered and congratulated him for setting a new record in body enhancement. He turned in shock to see Ryla standing there. His mind raced, wondering when she had entered the room since he hadn't noticed her presence until now. With a smile, she explained that she had been there the entire time, and Altos realized he had been so focused on his training that he had not noticed her at all. He made a mental note to be more careful next time, that as he looked at her, Altos couldn't help but think that Ryla was still incredibly beautiful. Her smile was cute, and it made her face flush with a soft, warm glow. She then mentioned that she had just finished cleaning, and asked if he needed anything, offering to help him in any way. Altos was touched by how kind and gentle she was, finding himself even more impressed with her thoughtful nature. Altos found himself staring at Ryla, momentarily distracted. He observed that, although it wasn't officially stated, she appeared to be in her mid-teens. This made him wonder what the developers had been thinking when designing her character. As his mind wandered, he thought about how having someone like Ryla as a personal maid would be an unfair advantage, but he knew that exploiting her in such a way would only lead to trouble. His gaze remained distant, lost in thought, and this caught Ryla's attention. She noticed that something seemed to be bothering her master, and gently asked if he wanted to talk about it. Altos was taken aback by how perceptive she was, realizing that she could sense his inner turmoil. In his mind, he couldn't help but admire her kindness. Thinking that she was such a good person, he also thought to himself how disgraceful it was that someone like him, someone with such a dark side, would treat a good girl like Ryla so badly. He needed to reflect on his actions. Meanwhile, Ryla was eager to hear about her master's troubles. Her face filled with excitement as she waited for him to speak. Altos gestured for her to sit, and once she did, tea was served. As Altos sipped his tea, he explained everything to Ryla, who listened attentively, though her expression seemed distant, as if she was lost in thought. Finally she spoke, commenting that it seemed her master was concerned about the excessive amount of magic power released during body enhancement. Altos nodded, confirming her observation. He explained that, given his larger reserve he didn't want to draw too much attention to it. Ryla's face lit up with excitement as she exclaimed that it was just like her master to avoid showing off. She asked if that was the real reason he didn't want others to know about his magic power, and as she said this, her face flushed a light red. Altos gently corrected her, acknowledging that while she misunderstood him in a positive way, he was fine with it, that he was comfortable with her seeing him as someone extraordinary. He also admitted that the loss of magic power during body enhancement was more significant than he initially thought. Ryla, closing her eyes and resting her chin in her hands, commented that it must be troubling for him. Seeing her close her eyes so casually, Altos realized that asking Ryla for help wouldn't solve his problem, but he appreciated her company and her willingness to listen. Even though she couldn't help him, He found comfort in her presence, grateful for her kindness. Suddenly, Ryla's eyes widened in excitement. Her face flushed even more, which only made her look even cuter. She then shared that whenever she tried to do too many tasks at once, she ended up failing, like breaking dishes. She explained that it wasn't until the headmaid advised her to focus on one task at a time that she started to fail less frequently. Altos, hearing this, wondered if Ryla was a bit clumsy, but her enthusiasm brought a smile to his face. Ryla, with an excited expression, then asked if it might be a bad idea to focus all his magic power into one spot at a time. She seemed to think it was an amateurish suggestion, but Altos considered it carefully. Perhaps this was something worth exploring, a new approach to concentrating his power more effectively. As Altos stared at Ryla, his mind wandered back to the idea she had suggested about concentrating magic power in one spot. It felt like her words were sinking deeper into his thoughts, and he found himself lost in contemplation that he extended one of his palms, focusing intently on it, and activated body enhancement. He concentrated the magic in his palm, and as he stared at it, he noticed it faintly glowing with mana. He was surprised to realize that he had managed to execute the concentration technique that Ryla had suggested. But then, just as his excitement grew, he saw the body enhancement vanish from his palm. That IT faded away at the very moment he became too excited, making him realize that this technique was harder to master than he had expected. This realization troubled him. He remembered that this kind of magic didn't exist in the original game, and no character had the ability to use it, that he told Ryla that he had only tried partial enhancement. She was shocked by this, asking if it was true, and expressing her confusion since she couldn't see the magic leaking off him. Altos explained that for some reason, the magic didn't leak much from the enhanced part, which was quite surprising to him that he thought to himself that this magic didn't exist in the game, and no character could use it. But now it seemed that he had discovered something unique. The idea of having a magic ability that only he could use excited him, and his face flushed with excitement. He realized, however, that he couldn't be sure yet that it was only he who could use it, so he needed to be cautious. That he then commented to Ryla that partial enhancement seemed difficult to train to a practical level, but that with this technique, he could enjoy body enhancement without drawing attention. He told her that it was all thanks to her. Ryla, with an excited expression, asked if it was really true. She was thrilled to have been able to help her master. Altos then asked if she could keep the partial enhancement technique a secret from everyone, explaining that if it spread, he would lose his advantage. Ryla, surprised, asked if that meant it would be a secret between just the two of them. Altos confirmed this, and Ryla's face turned bright red as she smiled, saying that she understood and wouldn't tell anyone. Altos was taken aback by how willing she was to keep this secret for him. Her willingness to help made him happy, and is flushed with a mix of gratitude and surprise did I end his mind. He couldn't help but think that he was becoming quite fond of Iris. However, as he considered Ryla's actions, he realized that his feelings might be shifting. He was genuinely impressed by how kind and supportive she had been to him. A few weeks later, Altos continued his usual training routine, which consisted of running, push-ups, sit-ups, sword swings, and also practicing his partial concentration technique for body enhancement. One day, while trying to focus the partial body enhancement into his hand, he managed to make his palm faintly glow with mana. He couldn't help but think that, as expected, even after only a few weeks, the practice was beginning to show results that he reflected that he was gradually getting used to concentrating magical power. Just then, Ryla entered the room where Altos was practicing. He raised his other palm and asked her to guess which hand he was enhancing. Ryla stared at both of his hands and said she couldn't tell at all. Altos instructed her to look closer, and after she moved in a few inches, she excitedly commented that she could now see the faint glow of mana from one of his hands. As Altos observed the faint mana emanating from his hand, he thought to himself that, with this level of concentration, it wouldn't be easy for anyone who wasn't paying close attention to notice that he was using partial body enhancement in combat. The technique seemed to release only a ridiculously small amount of magical power. If he wished, he could keep it activated for hours, a fact he found particularly useful. He remembered that, in the game, it was impossible to hide magical power, but here, in this world, he could. Despite being in the same world as the game, there were slight differences. Altos then turned to Ryla and asked if partial enhancement was her idea. She replied of course, and added that she hadn't heard of anyone else who could do it. Altos smiled slightly, commenting that the technique Ryla had taught him might be a cheat skill. Though he wasn't entirely sure, he felt that he was probably right. He then thought to himself that, in the original game, Altos was a strong character. But only at the early stages did the game progressed. The main character grew to cheat-level strength, and Altos, unable to keep up, became relatively weak. But with this new technique, Altos could grow truly strong. He spoke aloud, saying that even if the technique didn't work later in the game, it should at least be effective during the mid-game. Hearing this, Ryla got excited and asked if her master had thought of a new game. She added that she would love to play with him too. Altos reflected in his mind that the technique, though effective, was inconvenient without a name, that he then settled on a name for it. He decided to call it Mob-Style Body Enhancement. Altos stood in the middle of the room, troubled, as he pondered which path to choose. Ryla entered, bringing him tea. But noticing his lack of attention, she quickly deduced that he must have been lost in deep thought. She asked him what was troubling him, calling his name to snap him out of his reverie. Upon hearing his name, Altos turned his attention to her, and as he saw her standing there with the tea, he was momentarily surprised. He then told her that he had built up his basic strength, and was now ready to start learning swordsmanship, that he asked her which would be better for him, learning from the knights or the mercenaries. Ryla's face lit up with excitement when she heard the word mercenaries, her enthusiasm evident as she nearly jumped in place. Altos, shocked by her reaction, asked what was going on with her. Ryla explained that, as the heir to the Duke's family, it would be better for him to learn from the Randall Knights, as most of the knights were sons of noble families. She noted that these knights were highly loyal, refined, and dedicated to their duties. Altos wondered about this, placing a hand on his chin as he thought it through, that he remembered the information he had received from the headmaid, who had explained that the Altos family's Duke, Randall, maintained two distinct forces, one being the knights and the other, the mercenaries. The headmaid had clarified that the knights were responsible for protecting the Duke and maintaining the security of the territory, essentially functioning as a police or military force specialized in combat against people. On the other hand, the mercenaries were primarily adventurers, tasked with eliminating monsters that invaded the territory. These mercenaries were said to have extensive combat experience and a wide range of specialized techniques. Lost in thought, Altos carefully weighed his options. Ryla, noticing his silence, snapped him back to reality with her excited comment that the knights should be the choice. She insisted that they were the only choice. Altos replied that what he needed most were survival skills, and he decided that the mercenaries were the right choice for him. He then said it was time to go. When they arrived at the mercenary training ground, Altos felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. His legs began to shake and cold beads of sweat formed on his face. He whispered to himself that this was bad, and then, in his mind, he reflected on how this was what it felt like to have one's legs shake in fear, that he reminded himself that this wasn't a game like his previous life, where things were scripted, and if someone got punched, it didn't actually hurt. Here, if someone was cut, they bled. He just wanted to practice in peace at home, feeling stronger and more confident, but now he was overwhelmed with anxiety. It was clear to Ryla that something was wrong. She called out to him, noticing that he looked unwell, and suggested that they just go home. Altos could sense that Ryla genuinely wanted to return, but he refused to let himself succumb to the same fate as in the game. He reminded himself that he needed strength to protect himself, and summoning all the courage he had left, he walked forward, leaving Ryla behind. As Altos walked toward the group of mercenaries gathered at the training ground, he felt the of their cold stares bearing down on him. His nerves intensified as one of the mercenaries called attention to his presence, mocking him for being there with a girl, and asking why the young master had come at all. Another mercenary joined in, making fun of Altos' appearance, remarking that it was true the young master had lost weight. Despite his nervousness, evident by beads of sweat dripping down his face, Altos gathered his courage, and asked the mercenaries to teach him swordsmanship, that he could feel the rough atmosphere around him, just as he had expected from adventurers hired for money. One mercenary, with a mohawk, laughed and made a sarcastic comment, adding that it would be a problem to teach him. Another mercenary, observing Altos closely, remained silent, but a third, wearing earrings, mocked Altos further. He commented that it was a shame the young master had come here, and made a crude remark about not having any big-chested, bikini-armored female adventurers ready for him. Altos was shocked and confused by the comment, asking what the mercenary was talking about. The mercenary responded, asking if Altos didn't remember, then reminded him that the last time he had been here with the Duke, he had caused quite a scene, making a big fuss. Altos, still not recalling the incident, wondered what this man was referring to. The mercenary, now imitating Altos, mockingly used a childish voice and mimicked his past behavior, throwing a tantrum unless there was a big-chested, bikini-armored female adventurer present, mocking him for acting like a spoiled brat. Altos was stunned, and after hearing this, he turned to Rayla, asking if this was true. Her sad, nervous expression confirmed it, more than words could. The realization hit him hard, and he cursed the perverted version of himself in his mind. Calling himself the worst kind of brat, Darius Altos reflected on the situation. He found himself questioning the absurdity of it all. Was bikini armor really something to be laughed at? He knew full well that bikini armor had been a staple in fantasy works for ages, and he also remembered how, in his previous life, he had spent his money and bonus on acquiring a collection of bikini armor in a video game. The issue, he realized, wasn't necessarily the armor itself, but rather the fact that as the Duke's heir, he had made it clear he wouldn't train unless there was a big-chested, bikini-armored female adventurer present. The mercenary with the mohawk then spoke up again, telling Altos that today's training was over and suggesting that he leave, claiming they would contact him when they had a suitable big-chested, bikini-armored female adventurer for the young master. Altos, frustrated, insisted that he didn't need that all he was asking for was swordsmanship training. The mercenary's response was cold, that it wasn't acceptable. He reminded Altos that as the Duke's heir, he should act with more dignity and not retreat from his position. Altos was told to leave, and the mercenary added, with a slight shake of his head, that if there had been a big-chested, bikini-armored female adventurer, he would have gladly taught the young master swordsmanship. The mercenary then commented, with a slight sneer, that it wasn't as if they wanted the young master to leave because he was a nuisance. He made it clear, hoping Altos understood, that they had no interest in dealing with him any longer. Altos, confused and unsettled, began to realize that the people around him were treating him like nothing more than a troublemaker. His thoughts were interrupted when Rayla, with a shy expression, spoke up. As expected, she had prepared for this moment in advance. With a swift motion, she pulled off her cloak, revealing her bikini armor. She even commented that her chest wasn't particularly large, though. Altos was completely taken aback by her sudden action, and the mercenaries likewise were stunned. They all stared at her chest with eager eyes, mentally remarking on the absurdity of her comment. How could she possibly downplay her size when, in their eyes, anything larger would have been a grotesque monstrosity? Rayla then turned to Altos, speaking with an air of pride. She mentioned that she had done her best, as instructed, and that he should praise her for it. Altos, horrified by the turn of events, couldn't believe what had just unfolded. He cursed the version of himself that had put this young girl in such a position. He had tried to blend in as a background character, but now he had completely failed, and the thought of it made him cringe. He was filled with a deep sense of regret, realizing that Scum Altos had brought him to this point, and that he should never have allowed himself to be dragged into such situations. The man with the mohawk then commented, apologizing as he explained that, since the maid wasn't a female adventurer, she didn't meet the conditions set by the young master. It was clear to everyone that there would be no training today. The faces of the mercenaries turned red, as they all silently agreed that if they got involved with this infamous scumbag, their reputations as adventurers would plummet. They all made a silent pact to avoid the young master at all costs. Altos, seeing the mercenaries act this way, was shocked. He realized that this was before the full transformation into a scumbag had taken place. And yet, the disdain for him was already palpable. One of the mercenaries then called Altos' attention, commenting that he had a good maid. The rest of the mercenaries laughed, addressing him as Enrique-san, and pointed out that the conditions still hadn't been met by the young master. Enrique, however, replied that if it was something personal to him, there should be no problem, and he casually asked if that wasn't the case did I end his mind. He called the rest of the mercenaries idiots, thinking that if they sent her away, they'd never see her in bikini armor again. The man with the mohawk replied with understanding, stating that as long as it was Enrique-san's wish, they would comply. He respected Enrique's stance, recognizing it as something to be admired. The way he treated the maid's loyalty seriously, without taking it lightly. Enrique, standing confidently with his hands in his pockets, observed the mercenaries. Altos noticed that Enrique had managed to silence everyone, even those who had been out of control earlier, without needing to order them to shut up. This made him wonder if Enrique was the leader of the group. Looking at Altos, Enrique could tell that the young man was different from before. Altos hadn't just lost weight, he was in much better shape. Enrique noticed the bruises on Altos' hands, realizing that they would only look like that if he practiced swinging a sword every day. He was certain that Altos was no longer the same person as he had been before. Enrique then told Altos that before they began training, he would like to check his level first, that he asked if Altos would be willing to do a test match with him. With a confident expression, Altos replied that he understood, and in his mind, prepared for what was to come. As they moved to the weapon room, Altos thought to himself that even a wooden sword would hurt a lot if it hit someone, that he reminded himself that even an unlucky hit could break bones, trying to convince himself that Enrique wouldn't seriously fight him, especially considering he was just a 10-year-old. Enrique was already seen warming up, swinging his sword in flashy arcs, preparing for the upcoming fight. Altos turned to the man with the mohawk and asked, with curiosity, what rank Enrique was. The man with the mohawk was about to answer with a pinched expression, as though the answer were heavy, but Enrique cut him off. He asked if Altos had just inquired about his rank. Smiling brightly, he casually remarked that the guild had stripped him of his rank, guessing that this meant he was now unranked. Enrique laughed loudly, making the situation seem even more embarrassing. Altos was shocked to hear this, wondering what kind of actions could have led to Enrique's rank being stripped. In his mind, he started to feel that Enrique was giving off a deadbeat vibe. Then, he remembered what the headmaid had told him about the mercenary group. She had explained that they had been excellent in the past, but now, most of the skilled adventurers had fled. Altos had asked why the good ones had left, and the headmaid had replied that it was because the family's reputation had hit rock bottom. After hearing this, Altos asked if something had happened, and the headmaid explained that the family's prodigy had started acting strangely. By now, it was clear that the cause of these changes was likely the scoundrel Altos and his atrocious behavior. The headmaid had also told him that most of the mercenary group now consisted of F-rank adventurers, who she suspected were more suited as playmates for a spoiled brat. Altos couldn't help but realize that the headmaid had been referring to him with the term spoiled brat. The headmaid had continued by explaining the adventurer ranking system. The highest rank was S rank, held by world-renowned adventurers, followed by A rank, which represented adventurers on par with top-tier armies. B rank adventurers were impressive in their own right, while C rank adventurers were simply notable. D rank adventurers were average, E rank adventurers were rookies, and F rank adventurers were apprentices. As Altos snapped out of his thoughts and felt the weight of his sword, he began to process what the man earlier had been about to say. The rank of Enrique was likely E rank, and Altos was certain that Enrique had originally been an F rank adventurer. He had no doubt about it. Altos was eager to test just how well he could fare against someone of Enrique's level. With a determined step, he walked toward the arena, where he saw Enrique already standing, his sword resting on his shoulder. Enrique, without a hint of fear, said that he was ready whenever the young master was. Altos could see the intimidating demeanor that Enrique projected, but he wasn't about to back down. With a smirk, Altos commented that he would apologize in advance if he couldn't hold back and accidentally hurt Enrique-san. As he raised his sword, his face flushed with excitement, a bright red smile spreading across his face. Enrique could easily see that Altos was eager for the fight. Their eyes locked, and Altos felt the rush of adrenaline as he charged at Enrique, swinging his sword with force. Enrique, however, dodged effortlessly, bending low to take a swing at Altos' stomach. Altos, agile and quick, jumped into a somersault, narrowly avoiding the strike that he landed gracefully on his legs and hands, amazed by how close the attack had come. In his mind, Altos acknowledged that Enrique's strike had been nearly perfect, while Enrique, surprised by Altos' ability to dodge, wondered if the young master had seriously managed to avoid it. Altos himself recognized that what he had just done was a standard counter technique from his last Arcanium video game, and he had been able to dodge because he was familiar with it. Meanwhile, the man with the mohawk observing the move was visibly shocked, making him comment that the young master was surprisingly skilled. Another mercenary chimed in, agreeing with the observation, but adding that the young master's movements were quite straightforward, so it wasn't a big deal. Rayla, watching her master fight, cheered him on silently in her mind, thinking that the young master should keep it up. Then Enrique spoke up, drawing the young master's attention. He said that if the young master couldn't use body enhancement, then this fight would be a waste of time. Apologetically, Enrique added that he would finish it with the next move. At that moment, a mana leak emanated from Enrique's body as he activated body enhancement, which the young master noticed. In his mind, Altos realized, just as he had thought, that without body enhancement, he couldn't even handle an F rank. He concluded that it was fine because he too would now use his secret technique, that he silently activated his body enhancement, using it on his legs, and in an instant, he closed the distance between himself and Enrique. He charged in with his sword, catching Enrique off guard with his sudden speed. For a brief moment, Altos was confident he was going to win this fight, as he was about to strike Enrique, who seemed completely unprepared for the speed of his secret technique.